the brand new Switch 2. Nintendo invited me out to the launch event for the Switch 2 here in New York City, so let's go give this console a try. So this is my first time getting hands-on with the Switch 2. The first thing that jumps out to me is the mechanism for the Joy-Con. It's loud in here, but listen to this click. It is so good. And the way the button kind of like kicks it out, do you see? When you sort of push the button, it like sort of detaches the Joy-Con a little bit and you just naturally pull it apart. On top of that, when you actually have the Joy-Cons attached, it feels a little bit more sturdy. I always had a problem with the original Joy-Cons on the Switch. It just felt slightly wiggly, but with this, because you've got that sort of deep rail on the inside, it attaches pretty firmly. On top of that, I really like the kickstand. So it is fully adjustable, so it will stop at pretty much any sort of spot, almost flat, and then all the way up here. So the kickstand is much more something like a surface. You'll also see down here is the micro SD Express card slot. You do have your dual USB-C, so you have one on the top as well as one on the bottom. The weight's also pretty nice. I was a little bit concerned about what it was gonna feel like when you have it's a much larger display, but my first impression is this still feels a lot more manageable than something like a Steam Deck or what have you.
A huge thank you to the sponsor of this video, Grammarly. Now I make videos, but what you might not realize is that a huge part of my work involves writing. Emails, pitches, scripts, editing notes, and so much more. So when Grammarly reached out, I was excited to check out what I've always been told is their super useful spelling and grammar checker. But now they can do so much more. Grammarly is the perfect writing partner, especially when I'm up at midnight trying to finish a script. As you might imagine, words might not word too well when you just want to go to sleep, but Grammarly's new AI features not only help me to sound more coherent, but it also seriously cuts down on the time it takes to finish. One of my favorite features is helping with the tone of the writing. Sometimes I'll go back and forth on a particularly stubborn line that just doesn't sound quite right. In just a couple of clicks, Grammarly helps me to find the best delivery. The best part is Grammarly is free to use. All of these AI features are free, so you've got nothing to lose except maybe your bad writing. Check out Grammarly by going to grammarly.com/AustinEvans or by using the link in the description. And thanks again to Grammarly for helping me to sound real smart. I mean, very intelligent.
So I've just spent the last couple of hours playing with the Switch 2, and I have an enormous amount of first impressions. So first and foremost, let's talk about the hardware. It's certainly a lot more manageable than something like a Steam Deck or any of the PC handhelds, which is nice because you look at the 8-inch screen and I mean that's fairly large, but it's pretty comfortable. Now the only time I was able to actually try it without like all the extra stuff on the back was one of the demo models that didn't actually play. So all of my gameplay was with like some big heavy chain on the back. So I can't speak to how well it's going to hold up when you're playing for hours and hours at a time, but it feels reasonable. Again, an improvement over the other PC handhelds out there. Now, something else that I'm very impressed with are the Joy-Cons. I cannot underestimate how nice these Joy-Cons feel and how well engineered they are. I took them on and off a bunch of times. It is really, really nice. If Nintendo have done anything right with this hardware, the Joy-Cons are absolutely one of them. Speaking of the Joy-Cons, they're now taller. And boy, oh boy, does it make a big difference. I was playing some Mario Kart and we had like the little grip, which by the way, the little Joy-Con grips actually have these ZR buttons on the back, the little programmable buttons, which I didn't even realize. It's taller, and for someone with completely average sized hands, maybe slightly above average, some might say, it feels really comfy. Like again, it's an improvement over the original Switch Joy-Cons. But the biggest improvement, and I'm gonna talk a lot about Joy-Cons because that's probably my favorite part of the Switch too, is the mouse mode. So, both Joy-Cons have a mouse sensor on the inside. Now, the way this works is you can just use it by itself, but what you'll probably want to do is attach the little magnetic wrist strap, because that also has a couple of mouse skates on it. It is super cool to play with the mouse mode. So the first game I tried with it was Drag and Drive. This one, I will say I was not a huge fan of because what you're doing is you're sort of pushing it like a wheelchair, right? So each one of the Joy-Cons is your right or your left wheel. It's a cool demo. My issue is that it's not a really comfortable grip because for the other games, you're just mousing, right? It's maybe not going to be as comfortable as a real mouse for extended periods, but you're moving around, it's fairly standard. But with this, you're pushing backwards and forwards, right? And what I found was 5 minutes in, I was like feeling like fatigue on like the top of my shoulder. And like you've got this real claw grip, especially because you're like spinning and turning and shooting. However, I was much more impressed playing something like Civ 7. So you can easily use the sticks when you hold them up. So both Joy-Cons understand when they're in mouse mode and when you pick them up. So specifically in Metroid Prime, your reticle changes. And what I was doing in Metroid was as I was moving around, I would pick it up sometimes, feels more comfortable to use the sticks, then I would set it back down, use it as a mouse. It's really clever stuff. Something like Civ, you actually can do almost everything just with a single Joy-Con. So If there's one takeaway that you should take with this Switch 2, the Joy-Cons are a huge step forward. The HD rumble is also really impressive. I was only able to play a couple of games, but it feels much more similar to something like the DualSense, the PS5, and that there's a lot of fidelity there. Those Joy-Cons are absolutely mint. I have no notes. So I'm about to play Cyberpunk, and something that's immediately jumped out to me, this is the Switch 2 Pro controller. I don't know what they're doing with the stick, but it's like such a smooth mechanism, especially when you're like routing it around. What are they doing with these sticks? Why do these sticks feel so smooth? I'm gonna play some Cyberpunk. So this is one of the games that is going to be natively supported on the Switch 2. So we're looking at 1080p, either 30 or 40 FPS. Now I was able to play a few games using the internal display. It is a 7.9 inch, 120 hertz HDR LCD. That might be a whole lot of alphabet soup. What you're getting here is a larger display, certainly an improvement over the original Switch, which had like a 6.2 inch screen. However, it is an LCD, and it looks like an LCD. It's bright, it's HDR, it looks nice. It is not as nice as something like a Steam Deck OLED. Now, the fact that it's 120 hertz is good. I actually didn't think none of the demos that I tried had 120 hertz running on the internal display. I got to try 120 hertz with Metroid Prime on a TV, which looked phenomenal, by the way. But as far as the actual display itself, it is a good display. It is not a great display. It's bright, but the contrast, especially the viewing angles, are just not as good as an OLED. All right, so let's talk about graphics. They've been kind of quiet on like tech specs, right? So I can't tell you it's got a quad-core processor, this many NVIDIA GPU cores. I have none of that. So all I can go on is what I've talked about with some of the developers here and sort of my own first impressions. I think this Switch 2 is more powerful than the Steam Deck. So specifically playing a game like Cyberpunk, which to be fair is playing a little bit of an older build, it runs pretty well. Now the motion blur is a little bit strong. Some of the hair rendering is not quite there, but they were telling me that that's not a final build. It's like they've got a couple more months of sort of tweaking and tuning, so I can give a little bit of a pass. If I was to take a guess, I would say we're certainly below something like Series S or Series X or PS5 performance, but it does feel like it is a step up over what you're gonna get on the Steam Deck, at least when you're in docked mode. In portable mode, it might be a little bit closer. It's certainly using that new dock, which actually has a dedicated cooling fan to help cool the system off. And a game like Mario Kart, which has been entirely optimized for the Switch 2 hardware, looks and runs great. But surprise, surprise. I mean, Mario Kart looked great on the Wii U. So graphically, a little bit more impressive than I thought. Metroid was a game that ran at 120 FPS beautifully, smoothly. A lot of the other games are 30 FPS. But it's a mix, right? 30, 60, 120, clearly not on par with the PS5. No one should expect that, but quite solid. Battery life is an interesting one. The Switch 2 actually is a little bit of a downgrade here compared to the original Switch. So if you're comparing to the launch Switch, that was quoted at a minimum of 2.5 hours. And the Redbox Switch, the Switch Lite, especially the Switch OLED, are 3 hours plus. However, this is at a minimum of 2 hours. Now to be fair, it's 2 to 6.5 hours, but realistically, you're probably gonna be 2 to 3 hours of realistic battery life. Now, I will say that that's about what you're gonna get from a Steam Deck. And also, it's clear they're pushing this chip pretty hard. I was playing handheld for like 15 minutes. The console was warm, not hot, not uncomfortable, and it's way too loud here to tell what the fan noise was. But if you're expecting great battery life, especially if you're coming from the original Switch, sorry. Let's talk about the elephant in the room. Pricing, and specifically games. So, the Switch 2 is going on sale for $450. $500 if you want to get the bundle with Mario Kart. I, before coming to this event, was very excited for the idea that they would go for $399. That's what I hoped for. $450. I don't think it's incredibly unreasonable, if I'm being honest with you. I mean, it is still cheaper than something like a Steam Deck OLED. It also, I think, if we're speculating ahead, leaves room for either a price cut or realistically like a Switch Lite 2 to come in at something close to $300. So it's a lot of money. If you want to be patient, you can be patient. I don't think it's entirely unreasonable given how much they've done with the improvements to the Switch 2. The games are where this is a little more tricky because, so traditionally, Switch 2 games are like $60. There are a few that were 70, but brand new titles were generally $60 or less. What we're seeing now is that the games have all moved up a tier or two. So games like Mario Kart, games like the new Kirby, like a number of the brand new Switch 2 games are $80 It's understandable given that games were $60 back in 2005. It's a little bit unfortunate if I'm being honest with you. Now, there is a little bit of a variety of prices. So some Switch games are gonna be 70, some are gonna be 60. It seems like kind of 80 is just sort of like the ceiling. I think this is gonna be one of those things where it's an uncomfortable pill to swallow, but we're gonna get used to it because all games are gonna move up. And there is at least still some variety. It's hard to defend, if I'm honest with you. However, $80 games, I think, are here to stay and then some. Now, speaking of the actual games themselves, there's a lot of different ways you can play games on the Switch. By default, the vast majority, not all, but the vast majority of Switch 1 games are just put the card in and it works. There are a few that have compatibility issues. Something like Labo doesn't work because you need the physical Switch 1 hardware for it. But generally speaking, most Switch 1 games just work. Same token, Switch 2 games also just work because they're meant for the Switch 2. But there's a third category of game called Switch 2 Edition. Switch 2 Edition games are essentially Switch 1 games that have been updated to also run better on Switch 2. So some games, like Pokemon Scarlet and Violet, which definitely need the update, things like Super Mario Odyssey, 3D World, these are going to be getting free Switch 2 editions. So if you have the Switch 1 version, you've bought it digitally, physically, whatever the case is, you'll be able to just play it with the Switch 2 enhancements. However, a lot of games, including Breath of the Wild and freaking like 10, 15, a bunch of other games, are going to require expansion packs or paid upgrades. I don't know how much these are going to be. The speculation, $10, maybe 15 or 20 though. I get it. I mean, some of these games are going to come with like additional like content, so it's not just like a graphics update. You know, you're going to get like additional levels and stuff, so you can kind of think about it as DLC. And worst case scenario, you could just play the Switch 1 version. Now, one thing I am unsure of right now is what happens if you play a Switch 1 game that's not optimized on Switch 2 if you see any performance benefit. My gut is that yes, you probably will see some improvements in load time, and maybe if it's like an unlocked frame rate, it's closer to 30. But we're gonna have to actually get the Switch 2 into the studio and really try it to find out. Bottom line is this. The Switch 2 is a pretty major upgrade over the Switch 1. There's some questionable things here. I mean, you haven't even gotten into the fact that not all physical games are created equal. So some physical games just work, you plug it in and it goes. However, some physical games are actually just a license and you have to download the whole thing. The fact that it's got 256 gigs of storage is nice, but games like Cyberpunk are gonna be 64 gigs, right? So you're gonna fill that up really quickly. You're going to wanna take advantage of the microSD Express slot, which are a little expensive right now. It's like this. The Switch 2 really is pretty much everything you would expect out of the sequel to the original Switch. Let's not forget that the Nintendo Switch is about to be one of the most, if not absolutely the most popular game console of all time. It's right behind the PS2 in all-time sales. It is tremendously successful, and in my opinion, PC handhelds like the Steam Deck would not exist if the Switch had not blazed that trail. So, it is understandable that Nintendo played it pretty safe here. They took the existing Switch, they made it bigger, they gave it more performance, they improved the Joy-Cons quite a lot, and they've also increased the price. However, I will say that there are some real highlights with the Switch 2. The Joy-Cons, I cannot say enough nice things about. I don't want to overhype it, but between the magnetic mechanism, between the mouse mode, between the rumble, between the larger size, it's a huge improvement, at least for me personally. And the fact that the screen, while it's not OLED, is still 120 Hertz. You've got the ability to go 4K out once you put it on the dock. That dock has a fan, which is going to help boost the performance. There is a lot to like here, but make sure to subscribe to the channel and ring-a-ling that ding-a-ling button, because there's gonna be a whole lot more Switch 2 content coming soon.